Number 5. Bannack, Montana. Coming up first on our list of abandoned towns that might be home to something sinister is Bannack, Montana. This town is a notable hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts, due in part to featuring on Zak Bagans' Ghost Adventures, and if he was involved, you know it's legitimate. It was founded in 1862, when John White discovered there was gold on Grasshopper Creek and the bells rang and all the prospectors rushed into them hills to strike gold and make it big. After that fortunate discovery, Bannack became your typical gold rush community in the Wild West. That means a lot of people with missing teeth and big straw hats came in to come swing pickaxes at rocks looking for gold. An onset of prospectors and money meant that two-bit hoodlums and varmints were soon to follow. The roads leading up to Bannack became a dangerous place, where holdups, robberies, and all kinds of high noon trouble became common. It became infamous as one of the most dangerous parts of Montana. The route leading into it had more robberies than any other stagecoach route in the country at the time. And the wildest thing about this already pretty Wild West tale is that the leader of the outlaws that had been raiding the stagecoaches on Bannack was Bannack's own sheriff. That is incredible. That's an M. Night Shyamalan twist. Certainly explains why they were able to get away with it for so long. Now, with such a storied and troubled history of violence surrounding the town, is it any wonder that it's speculation that it's haunted? By the late 1860s, Bannack's gold rush began to fade, and it started to lose importance as a mining community to bigger things like Virginia City. While there were still people living in it all the way up until the 1950s, its trade diminished greatly. Less gold, less money, less people, less crime, fortunately enough, but less of a community. Eventually, the last few residents were displaced and the town would be converted into a state park. You can visit the decaying town now, kept preserved as if people should live there but don't. In a way, Bannack is much like these lives of all those prospectors and hopefuls, cut short tragically, existing now just as a spooky memory of a different time. Number 4. Pripyat. You can't really have a video on scary ghost towns without including the most infamous ghost town in history, maybe. It both seems like it's a cop-out to list it and also a mistake to ignore it. It's everybody's favorite irradiated town, Pripyat in Chernobyl. While reading about Chernobyl, I was introduced to the word kenopsia, which I hadn't heard before, meaning the feeling of seeing something that you know is supposed to be bustling and populated but isn't. And I think there are few places on Earth that match that description quite like the exclusion zone. You look at it, and it seems like everybody literally left in a second, leaving behind their personal belongings, their things. It seems like at any moment Chernobyl should come back to life, but won't. A safety test simulating a station blackout power failure would lead to a cataclysmic fire, leading to radioactive material being blown all over Pripyat and the surrounding areas, making it an inhospitable wasteland. 50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town. Yeah, that line is from Call of Duty. I did steal that. Now, Chernobyl, despite the fact that it is literally an irradiated wasteland straight out of the movies, is an above average popular site for tourists and would-be stalkers who want to explore around the exclusion zone for fun. I kind of understand it. I think I'd want to stand around, look around a bit, take it all in, and then immediately get out of there and go to a doctor. I'm not sure I'd spend too much time there personally. Now, as one might imagine, visiting the zone isn't as simple as walking on in and buying a ticket. For starters, the country's kind of busy right now, so not really the best time. But if you were to go, you're advised strongly to go with a guide or someone who knows the area very well, due to how dangerous and unknown everything is out there. Avoid touching anything unnecessary, vegetation, or the wild dogs that roam the streets. They're very cute, but their fur is just a little bit too irradiated for me. You gotta wear boots, a mask, and an outfit that covers as much as possible to avoid any dust. You're asked not to enter buildings without approval, since some of them are so degraded that they could collapse under you at any second, like the worst game of Jenga. It's kinda hard to look at stuff of Chernobyl and not feel like a pit in your stomach, you know? Looking at what happens when human indifference wreaks unspeakable havoc to the lands around it, poisoning the earth forever, radiating the animals, destroying people's homes and lives, and this ended on a bit of a bleak note, didn't it? I'm sorry, this list of abandoned towns hasn't been more fun. I did try to look if maybe there was like an abandoned circus or like an abandoned Toys R Us that would have been fun to talk about, but it's mostly going to be irradiated wastelands and places where everybody died. Sorry.
In at number 3 we have Jazrat Al Hamra, which is best known as the ghost town of the United Arab Emirates, is said to be the country's most haunted place, remaining a number of spooky events experienced by the locals and curious visitors. Jazrat Al Hamra is an abandoned island village located to the south of the city of Ras Al Khaimah, one of the 7 emirates that form the UAE. The coastal territory is the region's best example of a pre-oil village, displaying 3 distinct types of early and mid-20th century Gulf architecture. The town of Ras Al Khaimah is the crumbling remains of a once thriving fishing village. The name translates to Red Island for the red and bronze color of the sand on which the town was built. The former tidal island was predominantly home to the Zab tribe, who by 1831 developed the area into a renowned pearling trade center. It was home to over 4,000 inhabitants and dozens of fishing and trading ships, and with its good fortune came expansion that continued well into the start of the 20th century. But by 1968, Al Jazarat Al Hamra became nothing more than an abandoned town, due to a clash between the tribe and Sheikh Saka bin Mohammed of Ras Al Khaimah due to some unclear reasons. Thus, most of them migrated to Abu Dhabi. The village consisted of 334 buildings, including 18 shops and 11 mosques, and is nearly unchanged since its people left in 1968. Al Jazarat Al Hamra, now filled-in patch of land in the south of Ras Al Khaimah, remained abandoned and untouched. However, rumor has it that this extraordinary quiet and silent village is extremely haunted by the jinns. People even gossip that they can hear the strange noise and disembodied voices near the beach of this ghost village. Many visitors also assert that they felt uneasy, like danger was lurking, waiting for them when they pressed on further into the haunted village. Some of them even claimed to have reported seeing unexplainable handprints on the ruined pillars and walls, and experienced many more paranormal things within this haunted ghost town. In at number 2 we have Pyramiden, Norway. Some say that the Soviet town of Pyramiden, Norway was abandoned overnight, and for a good reason. Located in Svalbard, an archipelago situated between Norway and the North Pole, Pyramiden can be reached by boat from about mid-May until the beginning of October, when waters bordering the town are free from sea ice. Established in the 17th century, the town was used as a base for whaling and walrus trapping. Though at the start of the 20th century the culture shifted to coal mining. At first, Pyramiden was a sleepy place with hardly any residents at all, but after World War II the Soviets allocated more money to the town. They constructed dozens of new buildings, including a hospital, a recreation center called the Cultural Palace, and a large cafeteria. In the 1980s, the town's population reached its peak of more than 1,000 people, but not long, due to the wake of the Soviet Union's dissolution, the town would be left completely abandoned. As when the Soviet Union fell apart, mining stopped in Pyramiden, and the miners had to leave. On March 31st, 1998, the last coal was extracted from the mine, and the approximately 300 workers who still lived there began shipping out. The residents never returned, and today the town still stands much as it was when the last men departed. And finally, in at number 1 we have Batstow Village, New Jersey. There are around 28 known ghost towns in New Jersey, but this one has to be the most terrifying. Founded in 1766, the Batstow Village was built primarily to accommodate once prosperous ironworks. At the time, the site possessed 3 valuable resources: water for mills, abundant wood for charcoal, and naturally occurring bog iron. During the Revolutionary War, Batstow supplied the Continental Army with iron, while its remoteness protected it from British attack. In 1784, Batstow was bought by William Richard, whose family owned and operated the ironworks for 92 years. Following the discovery of coal and ore in Pennsylvania, in the 1840s the iron industry began to dwindle in the Batstow village. Nervous they were going to run out of business, the Richards family exploited another abundant local resource, sand, to make glass. But in 1874 a house fire spread and destroyed the glass making facilities, remaining furnaces, and 17 houses that were in the town. Due to the destruction of the glass facilities, the town of Batstow and the Richards family fell into bankruptcy. The Richards and many of the villagers moved away after the accident, leaving the site silent. In 1876 the property, along with huge tracts of land around it, was purchased by industrialist and businessman Joseph Wharton, with the plan of reinventing the declining town into an agricultural, foresting, and cranberry farm. But after his death in 1909, the land was held by a trust until purchased by the state in 1954 to form the Wharton State Forest. The state's plan for the town was to restore its 50-room mansion, as well as to rebuild the dam that was located on the lake, though the efforts to reinvent Batstow weren't enough to save it from its inevitable end. As when the state of New Jersey bought the village with a plan of improving it, the residents didn't see a future in the town, so they all left it, with roots that can be traced back to 1766 and the last remaining resident leaving in 1989. There are more than 40 structures still standing in the historic town, including a charcoal kiln, carriage houses, stables, ice and milk houses, a blacksmith, general store, gristmill, and a wheelwright shop, though they are all left untouched since the last residents left in 1989. Coming in at number 5 5 we have Ross Island. Located on an island in India closer to Southeast Asia than India, the island is known for beautiful beaches, unique marine life, coral reefs, and largely undisturbed forests. But beyond the island's beautiful views and stunning wildlife lies a dark past. Ross Island is one of the 572 islands that make up the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, the island is a ghost town where the remnants of a 19th century British settlement lie in ruins. In 1857, reacting to an unanticipated Indian revolt, the British Empire chose remote islands as the site of a penal colony, and Ross Island was one of them. The British first arrived in 1858 with 200 Indian convicts. The deadly task of clearing the thick jungle fell upon the inmates, while the officers stayed on the ships. Moreover, the development and town built at Ross Island began in 1858, and the prisoners were forced to build its buildings. The island was transformed to resemble a British town, with houses, offices, clubhouses, bakeries, stores, churches, and everything else that the British would not miss when they were away from home. The British ruled Ross Island for more than 80 years, up until nature was against the development. In 1941, a gigantic earthquake affected the island and left the town on the island completely ruined. The British thought rebuilding the town would not be worth it, and overnight left the island in complete ruins. Abandoned in the 1940s, the island is now being reclaimed by nature. Homes, a massive church, ballrooms, and even a graveyard all are in varying stages of decomposition, being taken over by an unyielding forest. In at number 4 we have Terlingua, Texas. Near the Mexican border, you'll find the town of Terlingua, Texas. In the 1800s, it was discovered that the area in which Terlingua was built was plentiful in cinnabar, a red mercury sulfide, from which mercury can be extracted. This caused an influx of miners to the area, but it wasn't until Jack Dawson's discovery and production of the area's first mercury in 1888 that it drew a population of 2,000, and by 1900 there were 4 mining companies in the area. When the Chisos Mining Company opened in the mid-1800s, workers and their families quickly relocated to the Terlingua, Texas. The Chisos Mining Company was founded and began operations in 1903 near Terlingua, Texas. The company specialized in the extraction of quicksilver and mercury. In 1799, Charles Harvard discovered that compounding the element produced fulminate mercury crystals, establishing its marketability. These crystals are useful in the production of gunpowder cartridges and shells. Mercury production had peaked during the First World War but began to fall, thus Chisos Mining Company had filed for bankruptcy and the miners began to trickle out. When the mine went bankrupt in 1942, Perry sold it and moved away. The population was around 3,000 at its peak, though it said that everyone up and left the municipality in the 1940s once the mercury was picked through. Thus, the once busy city became the ghost town we know today. It is now home to 110 people. By the end of the war, it was an abandoned ghost town. In at number 3 we have Wittenoom, Australia. Located 1,400 miles northeast of Perth, Australia, lies Wittenoom, a former blue asbestos mining town that has since been named the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere. Despite signs warning people to keep away, thousands of tourists visit each year, much to the risk of their own health. Up until the 1930s, the area surrounding Wittenoom was largely unused, until Langley Hancock discovered blue asbestos crocodylite in an area, unknowing at the time, but this is the most dangerous type of asbestos. It was typically used in rope lacking and pipe insulation, as well as in cement sheets and for ceiling tiles. During the 1950s, Wittenoom was the area's largest settlement, with a peak population of an estimated 20,000 coming and going from the town. For over a decade, Wittenoom was the only supplier of blue asbestos in Australia, exporting 150,000 tons. In 1966, the Wittenoom Gorge mine was closed due to unprofitability and increasing concerns over the health of miners. The following year, Australia banned the mining of blue asbestos. Of those who worked and resided in the town, over 2,000 have since died from illnesses caused by asbestos, including lung cancer, asbestosis, and mesothelioma. In 2007, the town was completely delisted, meaning it was completely shut down and then removed from the map. The town has literally been wiped from the map. Local tourist brochures just leave a vague blank area where Wittenoom actually is, and the national park don't feature the town despite covering everywhere else within a 1,000-kilometer radius. Coming in at number 2 we have Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Close to the border of Iran, Ashgabat, Turkmenistan is a former Soviet Union country run by President Saparmurat Niyazov. Much of the city was destroyed by the 1948 Ashgabat earthquake, where buildings crumbled to the ground, but has since been extensively rebuilt under the rule of the new president. The president planned to create a golden area of Turkmenistan in 1991 with the building of Ashgabat. He did so by building the city with the most marble buildings in the world. Thus, Ashgabat, the Turkmenistan capital, is a city of marble buildings and fountains. It is also an empty city with a population of around 700,000 people. Though the majority of the population doesn't live in the city, they live in the suburbs that are located outside the city limits. The only residents in Ashgabat are made of marble, as is the whole city. The buildings in the city are all made of white marble. The marbled maze of buildings and statues is very much the facade of the museum district, and it is these images that have gone around the world showcasing what can be done with millions of dollars at your disposal. Governments, museums, and theatre buildings, as well as expanses of parks, dominate the whole district. The unique looking architecture is nothing similar to that of any other city. There are few reasons why no one is permitted to live in the city, and for one is to keep the white marble clean. Another reason is that it gets so hot that it's not practical to walk in. Moreover, the public is forbidden to talk about the fact that the city is empty. Thus, one can only infer that the city was not built for the locals but used as a statue object to show the richness of the government. Today, the city is referred to as the City of the Dead because it appears so empty. This is in part also because of the country's isolated culture, as Turkmenistan is one of the least visited countries in the world. And finally, in at number 1 we have Hashima Island in Japan. Just 15 kilometers from Nagasaki and in front of the Japanese coastline, you'll find the abandoned island and city of Hashima. In the late 1950s, the island had a population of over 5,200 people. The people that resided on the island were mostly coal miners and their families. Since the island is so small at its peak in population, it was once the most densely populated place on the planet and 9 times the population density of Tokyo. Now the island is left completely abandoned and is effectively crumbling to pieces. The coal mining facility was previously called Battleship Island because its buildings and seawall make it resemble a warship. As for the island's fate, it was abandoned in the 1970s when petroleum fuels made coal obsolete. The island was built by Korean and Chinese prisoners who were forced to work after World War II. The conditions of these forced laborers were hard and some never made it back home. The people who worked here named the island Jail Island or even Hell Island. In 1974, the mine started to run out of coal and people left the island. Soon the island's uninhabited parts were reclaimed by nature. The weather conditions started affecting the concrete and buildings started falling apart. Sometimes people camped out here, but that was a very dangerous thing to do. The government wanted to discourage people from going over on their own, and therefore decided to open it to the public. Even though tourists are allowed to visit the island today, the echoes of the past still linger here. Fishermen who sail near the island claim they have seen strange flickering lights in the buildings, even though the island has no electricity. Strange noises have been heard and cold spots have been felt. People say that they had the sensation of being watched, and there were some claims of people that had been touched by unseen hands. Coming in at number 5, we have Goldfield, Arizona. Being deemed as one of Arizona's most haunted places, we have the town of Goldfield. Founded in 1893, Goldfield was a promising land for gold mining. The town grew rapidly, gaining 1,500 residents during its first year. The space was quick to build businesses including stores, a blacksmith, a butcher, a brewery, and 3 saloons. Though the town of Goldfield met its fall just as quickly as it was built up. After 5 short years, the gold ran out and people began to dwindle, eventually leaving it fully abandoned, securing its ghost town status. Being classified as a ghost town doesn't necessarily mean a place is haunted by ghosts, but this is not the case for the Goldfield ghost town. There's plenty of documentation and investigations that point to Goldfield being a paranormal active ground. It is known that a mysterious figure lurks within the shadows of the Goldfield ghost town, Bordello. It is unclear who this spirit would have been in life, yet it is commonly believed he was once a miner who lived in the town. Unexplainable knocks and bangs are heard in the building and some unfortunate visitors have been scratched. This activity is attributed to a dark character who's usually seen wearing a cowboy hat. Just on the horizon of the Goldfield ghost town sits a landscape made ominous by its name and the legend surrounding it. The Superstition Mountains are cloaked in mystery and at the center of many fables, making them notorious among the paranormal community. The Superstition Mountains carry many secrets, the most famous being the location of a supposed supposed deposit of gold and riches in the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. A curse has kept this treasure safe since the days of Goldfield's mining boom. Many have set out to locate these riches, and many have returned empty-handed or found only death. Countless adventurers have perished in the Arizona heat pursuing this chase. Their ghosts are said to now haunt the mountainside. Other secrets of the mountain have people believing that the hill is a place where evil spirits hid and told stories of a devil that lived behind the mountain. There's also a rumored apparition of a hugely tall skeleton named the Borrego Phantom, which appears to those exploring the mountain after dark. Another layer of creepiness is added to the mountain by the local legend that reptile-looking people surface there after dark. All of these creepy mysteries are summed up pretty nicely in the Superstition Mountain's name. In at number 4 we have Glen Rio, New Mexico. Found on the state border of Texas and New Mexico lies the town of Glen Rio. Founded in 1901, it was a town where wheat and cattle farmers settled and grew a community. Being divided between two states made for some unusual customs in Glen Rio. The mail would arrive at a train depot on the Texas side, but would have to be transported to the post office on the New Mexico side. The Texas side was part of a dry county, so all the bars were on the New Mexico side. Because the gasoline tax was higher in New Mexico, all the service stations were on the Texas side. By 1920, Glen Rio had a hotel, a hardware store, and a land office, as well as several grocery stores, service stations, and cafes. Though Glen Rio's permanent population never rose above 30 people, the town survived with its tourist-based businesses catering to the many travelers along Route 66. By 1985, only 2 residents remained in the small town, and the Texas Post Office was the only business open. It too has long since closed. Other buildings have overgrown sites, missing windows, or debris surrounding them. The detritus of 4 decades when Glen Rio welcomed tens of thousands, fed and entertained them, and sent them on their way towards Chicago or California. In at number 3 we have Garnett, Montana. Found in Montana, the abandoned town of Garnett was another gold rush town that drew thousands of hopeful miners. Between 1862 and 1916, gold was mined from the area. During the peak of the town, it had hotels, saloons, schools, and stores in the midst of the town's biggest years. A 1912 fire burned down half of the town, and what was lost was not rebuilt. Many of the remaining structures were in poor condition even when they were lived in and regularly visited. This marked the decline of the town, as after 1917 the mine began to offer less and less, and by the time of World War I the town was almost fully abandoned. Garnett is perhaps the best preserved coast town in the state of Montana. There are plenty of people who believe the abandoned buildings are still home to some of the residents who once lived there. Some visitors have reported hearing laughter and music coming from Kelly's Saloon, which is the most common occurrence. I quote, "We didn't experience anything bordering on the supernatural during our visit, but we did find the beautifully preserved artifacts to be windows into Garnett's incredible past." Coming in at number 2 we have Jerome, Arizona. Located in Arizona, you will find the ghost town of Jerome. Once a copper mining town, Jerome was the 3rd largest town in the early 1900s. Its streets were filled with 37 saloons, 13 bordellos, and a meager 4 churches in 1917, and again in 1926 after a mine blast damaged the original. A series of ill-fated events at this site would almost lead one to call it cursed. When the Great Depression hit, conditions in the town took a sharp downturn. Plagued with man-made disasters and poor fortune, Jerome's population gradually dwindled from thousands to somewhere between 20 to 50 residents. Finally in 1950 the town was abandoned for good. A number of visitors have recounted other mysterious sightings. Visual apparitions range from human-shaped figures that roam the halls and stairways of the old hotel, to a friendly animal that is said to scratch and meow at the doors. Additionally, one of the town's most well-known ghosts is said to lurk at the town's community center. Formerly called Lawrence Memorial Hall, the building is more often familiarly termed Spook Hall due to several strange happenings. With all the other apparitions wandering about this historic town, the cemetery, of course, known as the most haunted place in the whole town. Visitors here have made numerous reports of dark figures moving about, the sound of ethereal footsteps, and the sounds of distant voices. The old cemetery includes graves dating from 1897 to 1942. And finally in at number 1 we have Cerro Gordo, California. Cerro Gordo is a ghost town located in Death Valley and is considered one of the best abandoned places in California. Cerro Gordo means fat hills in Spanish. It was named this for the vast amount of silver it contained. By the end of 1869 the city flourished and became well known for its promising business. By 1871 Cerro Gordo was well established as a mining town. The American Hotel was completed that year, as were several other permanent structures, a general store, restaurants and saloons. dunes. At its height, the town had 5,000 residents. In 1875, Cerro Gordo suffered a series of setbacks, necessitating the shutdown of its furnaces. These problems resulted from a scarcity of ore in the mine, which had lasted for several months, and the temporary drying up of its water supply. In addition, by late 1876, a fire accident happened through some of the mine buildings and the union shaft, and the furnaces were closed the following February due to the disaster. A more lethal blow was dealt by falling lead and silver prices, effectively ending this era of activity at Cerro Gordo. Because of all the tragedy that occurred in Cerro Gordo, there's been multiple paranormal investigations held at the grounds of the abandoned town. While the new owner of the town was purchasing it, he was warned that they might have some visitors hanging around, and by visitors they meant spirits. One of the now owner's ghost stories goes along the lines of, as he was walking toward the bunkhouse, he looked at the window, the curtain pulled to the side and a little face poked out. Under the assumption that the contractors were staying in the bunkhouse, he asked when they were leaving, and he was told that they're gone for 2 weeks. So a little uneasy, he locked up the door and went for a hike. By the time he got back, the kitchen light was on, even with the lock still on the door.
Number 5 on this list is Hashima Island. Hashima Island is honestly something straight out of a movie. In fact, it was even used in a movie before. For those James Bond fans out there, this island was where the villain in Skyfall had his evil lair. The History Network writes, Hashima Island is a vacant labyrinth of crumbling concrete, sea walls, and deserted buildings, yet it was once among the most densely populated places on the planet. The small island off the coast of Nagasaki was first settled in 1887 as a coal mining colony. It was later purchased by Mitsubishi, which built some of the world's first multi-story reinforced concrete buildings to house its bursting population. Hashima remained a hive of activity for the next several decades, especially during World War II, when the Japanese forced thousands of Korean laborers and Chinese POWs to toil in its mines. By the 1950s, the 16-acre rock was packed to the gills with more than 5,200 residents. Most workers found the cramped conditions unlivable, and the city was promptly abandoned after the mine closed in 1974. 40 years of neglect have left Hashima a dilapidated ruin of collapsed staircases and condemned apartments. Many of its high-rises are still filled with old televisions and other relics from the mid-20th century, and its once teeming swimming pools, barbershop, and school classrooms now sit in shambles. Similar to a lot of other entries on this list, this place isn't unfamiliar with death. A lot of those POWs who were forced to work here, they didn't make it out alive. Coal mining conditions were bad for those who did it voluntarily, but for those who were forced to do it, it was even worse. This place is just as cool as it is creepy. Like, an abandoned island with high-rises definitely gives a cool, explorative vibe, but at the same point, there have been some creepy sightings here before. The mines are definitely believed to be haunted. People think that there are some sort of creatures living down there. Like, the toxic fumes of the mine mutated someone or something, and now there are these demons living down there. Only way to know for sure is if you find out for yourself, but I wouldn't recommend it. Number 4 on this list is Varosha. The story behind Varosha doesn't seem like anything that would happen in today's world. History Network says, in the early 1970s, the immaculate beaches of Varosha, Cyprus served as one of the most popular millionaires' playgrounds in the Mediterranean. The suburb boasted a thriving tourism economy, and celebrities such as Elizabeth Taylor and Brigitte Bardot were known to take in the sand and sun at its high-class beachfront hotels. All that changed in August 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus and occupied its northern third in response to a Greek nationalist-led coup. Varosha's 15,000 residents fled the city in terror, leaving their valuables and livelihoods behind. Most assumed they would return once the fighting stopped, but ongoing political strife has seen Varosha waste away behind a heavily guarded barrier ever since. The few intrepid explorers who had ventured into the no-man's land described the resort as a crumbling ghost town. Trees have grown through the floors of restaurants and homes, and most of the former residents' belongings have been looted or destroyed. What is left stands as a spooky time capsule of the 1970s, including bell-bottoms and shop windows and 40-year-old vehicles still parked at car dealerships. Imagine fleeing your home with 15,000 other people and then just literally never being able to go back. We currently live in a society where, for the most part, we feel pretty safe and in our our routines. But when you hear about something like this, it just puts life in perspective. That's how quick our entire lives can change and be totally uprooted. In a matter of minutes, we've lost our homes, our jobs, our money, and we're now fending for our lives. What's left of this place is just a sad reminder of the lives that all these people were forced to leave behind.
In at number 3, we have Terlingua in Texas. The town of Terlingua, Texas was once a bustling mining town full of life, wealth, and promise. Today it's a ghost town with abandoned mine shafts, a general store, an old jail, a church, and multiple ghost houses. Terlingua became of interest to local miners in the late 1800s when they discovered cinnabar, a red mercury sulfide. A man by the name of Jack Dawson discovered that mercury could be extracted from the cinnabar, and by 1900 there were 4 mining companies in the area with a population of over 2,000 people. The Chisos Mining Company owned the entire town of Terlingua, and at one point they built a general store, a post office, a hotel, a school, a theatre, and even a telephone service. Though conditions in the mine were tough, with the 7-day work week being the standard, working long days in the desert heat led many miners to lose their lives in the mines. To make matters worse, the Chisos Mining Company even paid their workers in coupons, which could only be spent at the company-owned store. The decline started once the mines dried up, companies left, and the people left with them. One of the scariest parts of the town is the church, which sits on the hill above the ghost town. One quote says, "As we approached the church, the door opened all by itself. Inside the church, visitors report an eerie feeling when entering the church. Moreover, several others report experiencing blackouts, blurred vision, and even hallucinations while exploring the abandoned town." Researchers theorize that this is due to low-frequency sound waves in the area that are able to alter people's perceptions of the things around them, and as well as disorient them. In at number 2, we have Ludlow, Colorado. Located about 12 miles north of Trinidad, Ludlow, Colorado is a ghost town known for an infamous event in 1914. A former mining camp, it was the location of the Ludlow Massacre. Beginning in 1910, the resident coal miners grew unhappy over their dangerous working conditions and began to debate a strike. By 1913, a strike had begun, much to the dismay of owner John B. Rockefeller. On April 20th, 1914, there was a massacre in Ludlow, where the Colorado National Guard and Colorado Fuel and Iron Company guards attacked miners, burning their tents to the ground. Known as the Ludlow Massacre, 25 people lost their lives. The massacre was the height of the Colorado Coalfield War, which began a year earlier in 1913. 2 coal mining counties, Las Animas and Huerfano, were the centers of the conflict. The United Mine Workers of America led the strike against the Colorado Fuel and Iron, owned by Rockefeller. They were upset over the horrible working conditions. Both parties led attacks back and forth over the years. Today, the old company town of Ludlow still stands as a ghost town, and the site of the tent city is also kept reserved, now under the care of the United Mine Workers of America. A monument to the deceased was also built by the Union at the site. In addition, the cellar where so many innocents perished is still in place. The doorway can still be seen and the dark depths of the pit can still be viewed. Though this isn't recommended, as many people who visit the abandoned ghost town report a strange feeling when looking through the doorway, and even worse, possible whispers around them with an unexplainable source. And finally, in at number 1, we have Helltown, Ohio. The abandoned town known as Helltown can be found in the Cuyahoga Valley in Ohio. There sits an eerie, deserted town known by locals to be haunted. No people live in the area anymore, though there are still remnants of the lives of former residents left behind. The whole town is surrounded by hazardous roads that seemingly lead to nowhere. Locals believe this was done to confuse any wandering explorers. But the Helltown Church seems to have inspired the town's ominous name. The tiny white church is in the center of Helltown and is central to all local theories. Some say the church was a place of worship for practicing Satanists who still lurk around the closed-off roads, hoping to recruit unwelcome visitors. Others believe the town was evacuated after a chemical spill that resulted in bizarre mutations of the residents and animal population. The legend of the Peninsula Python stems from this theory. There even sits an abandoned school bus in the town with legends of its own. The story goes that the bus was carrying a group of high school students who were going to one of the ski resorts near Boston when an elderly woman flagged down the bus. She was in a panicked state and explained that there was a young boy in her house who was seriously hurt. The bus driver, in an attempt to help, turned down her driveway and drove into the woods, hoping to help the boy. When the bus approached the house, Satan worshippers swarmed it and sacrificed all those on board. The bus sat back there for over 30 years, standing as a warning to all who decide to venture into Helltown. A local paranormal investigator set out to research the abandoned town, and to his surprise, surprise, what he discovered was truly frightening. He describes Helltown as not just truly abandoned, but is home to many spirits and hauntings. His personal experience with a ghost encounter was returning to his car to find strange people looking into his car windows. Both times the people vanished as soon as they saw him approaching the car before he had a chance to speak to them.
In 5th place, we have Isla de las Muñecas, Mexico. Decided to kick off today by being an overachiever. This is an entire abandoned island. The island of the dolls in Mexico is like something straight out of a horror movie, but my kind of horror movie. Located on Texuelo Lake, it is home to hundreds of hanging, slowly decaying dolls, thanks to a man named Don Julian Santana. Over 50 years ago, Don Santana left his wife and child and moved onto an island on Texuelo Lake in the Xochimilicos canals. According to him, a young girl actually drowned in the lake in the 1950s, and Don Julian Santana devoted his life to honoring this lost soul by collecting and hanging up dolls by the hundreds. Eventually, he transformed the entire island into a doll-infested wonderland. Now, he began collecting lost dolls from the canals and the trash near his island home. He's also said to have traded produce he grew to locals for more dolls. Don didn't really clean up the dolls or attempt to fix them, but he rather put them up with missing eyes and limbs, covered in dirt, and generally in whatever ramshackle state he found them in. Even when dolls arrived in good shape, the wind and weather turned them into cracked and distorted versions of themselves. Don also kept his cabin filled with the dolls, which he dressed in headdresses, sunglasses, and other various accessories. Despite the fact that most people found the island frightening, Don saw the dolls as beautiful protectors, and he welcomed visitors, whom he would, show around, charging a small fee for taking photos. In 2001, Don Santana was found drowned in the same area in which he believed that small child had passed away. According to legend, the dolls in the island are haunted by the spirits of the dead girl, and perhaps even by Don himself. Okay, who wants to go on a road trip with me? Anyone?
Oh, thanks.
In 4th place, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. So Pripyat is an abandoned city in northern Ukraine located near the border with Belarus. Named after the nearby river of the same name, it was founded on February 4th of 1970 as the 9th Atomgrad, which was a type of closed town in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was located in the adjacent ghost city of Chernobyl. So Pripyat was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of around 49,000 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27th of 1986, one day after the Chernobyl disaster, making it younger as a city at that time than I am now. Although it was located within the administrative district of Ivankiv Rayon, the abandoned municipality now has a status of City of Regional Significance within the larger Kyiv Oblast and is administered directly from the capital of Kyiv. Pripyat is also supervised by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, which manages activities for the entire Chernobyl exclusion zone. So following the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the entire population of Pripyat was moved to the purpose-built city of Slavutych. At the time of the evacuation, the average age of residents was about 26 years old, and the city housed 13,414 apartments in 160 apartment blocks, with 18 halls of residence accommodating up to, let's say, 7,600 single males or females, and 8 halls of residence for married couples. In terms of education, there were 15 kindergartens and elementary schools for 4,980 children, each with their own nickname, and 5 secondary schools for about 6,000 students. In 2019, it was announced that folks could start visiting the affected areas if certain health and safety procedures were followed, but I don't feel like visiting a radiation-affected city is high up on my bucket list at this point in time.
In at number 3, we have Nevada City in Montana. Miners settled in Nevada City in 1963, along with establishing their homes and businesses in this new town. Located in southwestern Montana, the town is 1.5 miles from Virginia City. The town was thriving up until 1876 when the gold miners moved to other promising sites. In 1896, the Connery Placer Mining Company destroyed most of the city's buildings. The company dredged the gulch and later abandoned it, leaving heavy wooden barges. This abandoned town being haunted is old news, as the Nevada City Hotel is reported to be frequented by the apparition of a road agent who lost their life nearby, according to online sources. Visitors have also reported hearing footsteps in the hallways and seeing shadowy figures standing behind their reflections in mirrors. Additionally, the spirit of an older cowboy figure who never speaks but lurks in the hotel rooms and even sits at the bar in the Virginia city. Back when the hotel operated, guests also complained of a weeping woman always in the same room, only to be told there was no guest in the room in question. In at number 2 we have Custer, Idaho. The mining town of Custer was born in 1879 by gold miners looking for their next gold hotspot. Prospectors discovered gold in what would become known as the Yankee Fork area of central Idaho in 1867. The area was worked on a small scale for more than a decade before the discovery of General Custer Mine. The General Custer Mining Company closed in 1888 and the district experienced a sharp decline. In 1899, the town of Custer has 5 saloons, 3 stores, a hotel and 3 boarding houses, but the town never established even one church. By 1910, most of the mines in the area were closed, and the Yankee Forks boom years came to an end. The combined population of Custer and the nearby Bonanza was just 66 people. The Silver Messenger reports just 2 families remaining in Custer in 1911, and then being fully abandoned the year following. Today it has been purchased by the US Forestry Service and, in conjunction with the Friends of Custer Society, is slowly being made into a historic site. Some original buildings have already been renovated, some are in process, and many others are slated to be restored. Several buildings lost in a 1960s grass fire are due to be replaced with replicas. The Forgotten Town is a landmark for many people such as tourists and especially paranormal investigators. In the old schoolhouse is a museum containing items left behind and showcases the town's unique history. Although interesting, you can't help but get an eerie feeling thinking about the people who once owned these items, as walking into one of these structures is like walking back in time. To think this town was once active with human energy and miners working every single day. And finally, in at number 1 we have South Pass City, Wyoming. Only about 10 miles north of the Oregon Trail is the shell of a town that used to be a busy gold mining camp. Established in a small valley along the banks of Willow Creek, the town was born in 1867. The town was built there because gold was discovered in the Wind River Mountains. By 1868, South Pass City boasted over 250 buildings, 1,000 people, and hundreds of claims. The town was extremely busy as its half-a-mile-long main street boasted numerous hotels, restaurants, general stores, 2 newspapers, doctors, a bowling alley, and dozens of saloons. The mining district continued to grow to as many as 3,000 residents. Miners looking for investors and newspapers promoting further settlement in the area exaggerated the region's amount of gold. But for South Pass City, its great success wouldn't last, and just 2 years after its establishment would begin to show its first signs of declining. Hitting a fall in early 1869, the town resurged briefly after outsider capital was poured into the area, but would fall again as expenses and hardships to recover the gold proved too costly for most miners. By 1872, the town was only occupied by only a few hundred people. In the end, South Pass would become a permanent ghost town. By 1949, the last of the pioneer families had moved on from South Pass City, and the buildings had fallen into disrepair. The grounds of the old town are known to be haunted, and Highway 287 that follows the route of the Oregon Trail over South Pass, which is the reason South Pass City ever existed, has had its fair share of ghost sightings. According to a local ghost story, a woman was driving home from a long day in Denver. Her friend had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. After passing through Jeffrey City, the driver spotted a dark, hunched figure walking toward the road in the sagebush. About a half-mile later, she saw the same figure closer to the road. She noted his pig coat as he became clearer. About a half-mile later, still thinking about this man and his surprising reappearance, she reached over to wake her friend and request she take a turn driving. As her friend awoke, she saw the same man at the edge of the road, just crossing the white line onto the highway next to the car. Screaming, they accelerated away and compared descriptions. It was certainly the same man.
Coming in number 5, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Sounds like a nice enough place, right? Who would abandon a prosperous coal mining community filled with interesting folks and a fun name? Well, anyone who likes to breathe things other than noxious gas. Oh, this one is less a mystery and more of a straight up fact, but the abandonment is super scary regardless of how you look at it. Way back in the day, Centralia was bustling. Rich veins of coal were discovered underneath the earth here, and folks were really excited to bring it up to the surface. What better way to make a profit? Unfortunately, this subterranean resource and favorite of Minecraft kids across the globe is also the reason for Centralia's downfall. The very same stuff that brought about plenty of business also made the town uninhabitable. Tragic, and maybe a nice little microcosm of the human experience. Apparently a landfill burn spread a little further than folks were expecting and ignited the underground coal. From an abandoned coal mine to the rich veins of black gold underground, this fire spread like, well, wildfire, scorching everything around. 140 acres of town, gone, just like that. A lot of it is still standing, but it's not safe to be around. The underground fires belch all sorts of horrid smoke, and many large sinkholes opened up due to the fire's influence. These days you might sense a presence or two while passing by, but don't worry, they're not ghosts, not yet anyways. Of the few thousand who used to live there, only about a half dozen remain. They refused to abandon their once lovely town, determined to live amidst the smoke and gas, the fire and flames. It doesn't look like the fires are going out anytime soon either. Some estimates see the blaze continuing on for a few hundred years, thanks to the constant supply of fuel underground. Coming in number 4, we've got Deception Island, Antarctica. Another wild and wonderful name. If I could choose to name the place I lived in anything, Deception would definitely be on the list. That's the kind of town that famous folk albums get named after, a place of legend for miles around. A place of rest, perhaps, or place of mystery. Deception is often thought of as a negative thing. Nobody likes being lied to, but if it's done well enough, deception can achieve plenty of things. But I'm getting off topic. We should be discussing the actual abandoned place, full of mystery, full of danger. Deception Island was a long-used whaling station back in the day. Norwegian folks would post up there for long stretches of time, enjoying the island's safe natural harbor. Eventually it became known for its research potential, attracting all sorts of folks from Britain and Chile. Now, I know what you're all thinking. A research base out in the middle of deep freeze nowhere. Well, there's gotta be some sort of lunatic alien there, morphing into different shapes and eating everyone for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And my mind went to the same place. But even after all of this, the island was also used as a British base during World War II, so maybe less deadly aliens after all, because the soldiers would have run into something like that. Although this island is also home to the largest cemetery in Antarctica, so chew on that for however long you need to. These days, the area is protected as a heritage site, so all of the abandoned, decrepit shacks, huts, and buildings are still there to be seen. Who knows what secrets and spirits lurk within, perishing due to Cold War or something more supernatural. Oh, and one last thing about this location. Even though it's as cold as ice and difficult for any living being to survive out here, there is something else that makes it even more dangerous. There are occasional volcanic eruptions on the island. Pardon me? So yeah, you'd best stay far, far away from this long abandoned haven. Even haven seems like a bit of a misnomer, don't you think?
Number 3 on this list is Bodie. Bodie is a small ghost town located in California. This town was once a booming little community back in the late 1800s. Eventually it busted though, and by the 1940s the last few residents had to clear out because no one was coming anymore. It was a town for gold-crazed prospectors and sounds like something right out of a Western classic. The town was known not only for its gold, but also its drunken shootouts, brothels, gangsters, and drugs. It feels like the type of place that you would go to in Red Dead Redemption or something like that. It was actually known to many around the area as the Sea of Sin because of all of this. Eventually it just ran out of money though, and slowly everyone had to leave. It's one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in the world though, and gives visitors a very clear picture of the darker side to the West back in the day. If you ever had dreams of being a Western cowboy gangster, then this is definitely the town for you. Number 2 on this list is Pripyat. Pripyat is located in Ukraine and definitely checks all of the creepy abandoned boxes. It's one of the main places that got affected by the nuclear accident that happened at Chernobyl. Back in 1986, the power plant had a horrible disaster, and the 49,000 people who were living in this town, they all had to leave. Anyone who was left behind or didn't go would have died soon after from the radiation poisoning. Many of the people who did leave had to deal with horrible health ramifications anyways, because that's just how bad Chernobyl actually was. Now the town is left completely abandoned and in ruins. Nature is slowly taking control of what we've left behind. There was a small amusement park that once stood here, and it's now a picturesque scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Everything about this town screams creepy. Not to mention the fact that people have talked about potential mutant creatures living here. That hasn't been confirmed, but it's definitely heavily rumored by the locals. We still aren't allowed to go here for long periods of time because of the radiation poisoning, and it may actually take centuries before it can be settled in again. And finally, finally, number 1 on this list is Oradour-sur-Glane. This once bustling French town is just a mass of rubble now after being completely decimated during World War II. The History Network says, on the afternoon of June 10, 1944, the village of Oradour-sur-Glane was the scene of one of the worst massacres of French civilians during World War II. In what is believed to have been an act of revenge for the town's supposed support of the French resistance, a German Waffen-SS detachment rounded up and murdered 642 of its residents and burned most of their homes to the ground. Only a handful of people managed to survive by playing dead and later fleeing to the forest. A new Oradour-sur-Glane was built nearby after the war ended, but French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the burned out ruins of the old town be left untouched as a monument to the victims. The facades of dozens of brick buildings and charred storefronts still remain, as well as graveyards of rusted cars and bicycles, scattered sewing machines, and unused tram tracks. 642 residents. This just goes to show how horrible World War II actually was. 642 innocent people were killed on June 10th that day, and honestly guys, I didn't even know about this incident until I started researching for this video. Atrocities of this nature were simply commonplace during that time, which is just terrible to admit. Obviously, this abandoned town is teeming with paranormal activity and is one of the saddest and darkest spots in all of France. People who have been through here have explained that sadness is literally palpable. The air grows thick and heavy, as if there are other presences around you that you can't see or touch. Several apparitions have been reported here, as well as a deep fog that comes over the town very suddenly and without warning. Based on what happened here so many years ago, it's no wonder that this place is abandoned.
Coming in at number 5, we have Tianducheng, China. Tianducheng is a town in the suburbs of Hangzhou, China, whose construction began around 2007. Built as an enormous luxury housing development, Tianducheng emulates the famous French City of Lights in everything, from the period-correct architecture to the 300-foot tall miniature Eiffel Tower. It even has a replica fountain from the Luxembourg Gardens. The city centre is an abandoned copy of Paris that even features the Eiffel Tower, which is 1/3 of its original size. With a capacity for over 100,000 residents, the city has remained mostly abandoned except for the employees of a nearby French-themed amusement park, according to City Lab. Tianducheng lacks much of what Paris has to offer though, including people. The lack of people is mostly attributed to its odd location, as Tianducheng is surrounded mostly by farmland and odd dead-end roads that snake throughout the countryside. When it first opened its gates more than a decade ago, it was described as a ghost town. While many of its homes remain vacant, the population has grown into the thousands, and it attracts a steady stream of Chinese and international tourists, including newlyweds looking for a picture-perfect backdrop. In at number 4, we have Ruby, Arizona. Ruby, Arizona is one of the best preserved abandoned cities in the United States, filled with history and the shell of the city used to be. By the 1870s, new prospectors made several additional claims, and the fledgling settlement formed at the mountain base was called Montana Camp. Other lead, copper, and zinc veins were also found in the immediate vicinity, beckoning yet more miners to the fledgling settlement. Throughout the years, the city and mining company associated with it got passed down to many different owners, while in the 1914s, Andrew sold the store to Philip C. Clark, who soon built a bigger and better one just up the hill, the remains of which still stand today. Though Ruby was growing, it was still a lawless place, and finally Philip Clark became so concerned for his family's safety that he moved them away to nearby Oro Blanco. However, he continued to work towards growing the city of Ruby and amassed large amounts of land and cattle until 1920, when he sold the store to brothers John and Alexander Frazier. From 1934 to 1937, the Montana mine was the leading producer of lead and zinc in the state, and the 3rd largest in silver production. However, the ore finally played out in 1940, and the town became a ghost. The mill operation was moved to Sahuarita. The post office closed forever on May 31st, 1941, though no records exist on the dollar amount taken from the Montana mine. One estimate puts the total for the Oro Blanco district at more than $10 million for the period between 1909 and 1949. The Ruby mines remained intact until 1970, when they finally collapsed. For decades, the area remained private because no access was allowed to to anyone other than the owners. Ruby has suffered from vandalism and theft often. Today, Ruby remains private, owned by a couple of different families working to preserve the town and make it into a recreational area. The good news is they now allow visitors. The old settlement continues to boast more than 24 buildings. Only Vulture City rivals it in the number of remaining structures in a ghost town mining camp.
Number 3. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Coming up next on this list of spooky ghost towns is going to be Centralia in Pennsylvania. Now, as far as ghost towns go, Centralia's got a bit of a Hollywood bug, serving as the inspiration for the titular town in the 2006 horror flick Silent Hill. Now, as a Silent Hill mega fan, I feel the need to point out the video game version isn't based on this town, but it is mostly based on Kindergarten Cop. Look that up, it's a weird thing, but the school in Silent Hill, school in Kindergarten Cop, I don't know. Now, Centralia, back to this one, was a once flourishing community wrecked by a coal mine fire that destroyed the town, leaving only fog and ash raining over the skies. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the coal tunnels that lay deep beneath the city, thousands of feet below the surface of the town. Rescue crews tried their best to put out the raging flame, but the flame was too mighty to be quelled and eventually caught a coal seam that's still burning to this day. The town was abandoned. Windows boarded up, debris left in the roads, and never-ending clouds of smoke and fog circling the cracked roads, really getting that Silent Hill feeling. Now, on paper, Centralia does not exist. The government removed its zip code, offices and buildings have all been abandoned, there's no services whatsoever. If you dial 911 in Centralia, nothing's gonna happen. The town has no infrastructure, so to speak of. It's a sad story, another disaster upending a town and the life that the residents had. Now, although the town was evacuated, there are a few clingers who refuse to give up on the life they've known. Perhaps it's rebellion or sheer stubbornness, but there are still a handful of people living in Centralia. The last census said that there were 5 homes that still had people living in them. Talk about a small town, I bet everybody knows each other. While everyone else fled, these last few loyalists intend to live out the rest of their days in Centralia, refusing to let the town be taken from them. So no demonic entities in Centralia, really, just some very tired residents who won't give up the ghost. If you ever visit, make sure to be nice, okay? I feel like they've been through a lot. Number 2, Varosha, Cyprus. Coming up next on our list is going to be Varosha in Cyprus. Once a shining playground for the glitzy and glamorous, this paradisal resort in the Mediterranean was a popular spot for the celebrities of yesteryear in the 1970s to get away from it all and put their feet up and stop worrying about the daily stresses of having a lot of money and being a movie star. That kind of lifestyle's taxing. The suburbs enjoyed a thriving tourist economy, with the golden sands and beachfront hotels being a force in enticing people to come. Of course, fame is fleeting and nothing in this world lasts forever, like celebrity resort towns. In 1974, Turkey would invade Cyprus and occupy the north in a response to a Greek nationalist-led coup. So the 15,000 people that lived in Varosha all up and fled the city in terror, leaving everything behind as it stood. Unfortunately, years of political strife and controversies in the area kept Varosha's residents from ever returning to their homes, leaving the city to rot in open air and decompose into a wasteland. One look at Varosha and it just seems like a tragic waste, trying to wrap your head around the money, livelihoods, industry, all just lost forever. It's a very eerie feeling looking at the photos of Varosha, seeing the earth try to take the city back. Buildings crumbling, trees sprouting through the bottom floors of cafes and restaurants. Well, why not just go in, fix the place up a little, you know, sweep up, clean it? Well, decades of neglect have done inconceivable damage to the infrastructure. The city has crumbled and wasted away so much that experts estimate that it would take upwards of $12 billion to make the decrepit city livable once again. So for the time being, it'll probably remain as a time capsule, frozen from better years where things were bright for this forgotten city. Number 1, Oradour-sur-Glane. Our final entry for this list today is going to be the somber story of the village of Oradour-sur-Glane, an abandoned town in France, infamous for being host to one of the worst massacres in French history during the Second World War. It's believed that the attack was an act of revenge because of the village's support of the resistance. So as retaliation, German soldiers rounded up 642 residents and killed them, and burned the houses to the ground. Some were fired at, while others were locked in a church that was burned. The only people from the village who managed to survive the horror were those that played possum and fled out into surrounding forests after the invading soldiers had all left. After the war had ended, nearby, there was a new Oradour-sur-Glane built nearby. But the original village, what's left of it at least, was ordered to be left untouched by President Charles de Gaulle, who insisted the village must be left standing as a monument to honor the dead who had been wrongfully taken too early. So, not quite a ghost town in the sense that there's stories of hauntings or chills through the night, but haunting in a certain sense, definitely.
In at number 5, we have Batstow Village in New Jersey. Located in New Jersey, Batstow Village is a historic community centered around the Batstow Iron Works. The site was ideal for iron work because there was water for mills, abundant wood for charcoal, and naturally occurring bog iron. The well-preserved and lovingly restored village dates back to 1766. As the operation of ironwork grew, so did the village. There were mills, cottages, and over 3 dozen structures and buildings still remain, many from the early 1800s. But by mid-1800s, iron production declined due to the discovery of coal ore. As the need for iron declined, then glassmaking was pursued by the town, but at that point the population already started to dwindle. When Joseph Wharton purchased the property, he primarily focused on forestry and agricultural endeavors. After Joseph Wharton passed in 1909, the property was managed by a trust. The state of New Jersey began buying the land in the 1950s. The last resident to leave the town left in 1936, but not before strange disappearances occurred. According to local legend and a bunch of conspiracy theorists, Ong's Hat offers a portal to a different dimension. In the 1970s, a few professors from Princeton fled there after being mocked by their quantum physics theories. This is when they claimed to have discovered interdimensional travel. According to other local legends, the devil is the 13th born son of the Leeds, the first inhabitants of New Jersey. Mother Leeds gave birth to a healthy baby, who within minutes transformed into this beast. This old ghost town is said to be a hotspot for the Jersey Devil activity, and in the last 50 years there have been numerous reports and encounters with the beast in this area. Some of these encounters include strange tracks along with hearing screams just outside of the village. One sighting of the Jersey Devil comes from a group that saw the creatures crossing the street in front of them. When visiting the village, some say you can feel his presence as if he's walking right behind you. In at number 4, we have Bodie, California. Located up in the Bodie Hills in Mono County, California, near Yosemite, in 1859, 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodie died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodie was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned into a well-populated town. Though like most mining towns, it saw its peaks, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century, a series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. With the dinner tables still set, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel are held up by a beam and have been left untouched for 100 years. Though it has been left abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in a crumbling state of decay, while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 60 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodie has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from abandoned buildings. They'd take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodie. Thus the curse of Bodie emerged: if you take something from Bodie, bad luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters, explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass or their romantic life to fail from stealing from Bodie.
Coming in number 3, we've got Glen Rio, New Mexico / Texas. Or should I say New Texaco? Maybe that's a little cheesy for your liking, but I'll say it anyway. This border town was once a hotspot for tourists, motorists, evangelists, and top 5 lists. Still is, considering that last one. However, like so many spots built along old school highways, this town relied heavily on those just passing through. So when a much bigger, faster, safer highway opened up far away from Glen Rio's limits, the whole place saw some terrible downswing. Gas stations, eateries, general stores, and mechanics all found that there wasn't much to do if the highway traffic wasn't coming through. A tough break for sure. What remains could pass for a location out of a new Fallout game. Empty buildings adorned with imagery consistent with the campy American dream. Burnt out husks of old cars, never to rev their engines again. Empty, sun-bleached motels with rotted out mattresses and busted windows. If anyone wanted to live their post-apocalyptic dream life, here would be the place. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if a few ghouls were roaming the wastes, eking out a modest life amidst the emptiness. When something so obviously meant to be jam-packed with people is devoid of all life, it can be extremely unnerving, and Glen Rio exemplifies this in spades. If I were to visit, I would expect dead silence. However, were some old-fashioned scratchy radio tunes to start playing, I would understand. That's just the ghosts of those who believed in the town trying to boogie after hours. Coming in number 2, we've got Oficina Chacabuco in Chile. A lot of ghost towns are left abandoned, with the occasional explorer stumbling through to see what life was all about. When whatever the town relied upon for prosperity, whether it be natural resources, tourism, or celestial protection, runs dry, people drift away. Over time, that means the town is no longer what it used to be, a shell, a husk. It's sad, but it's also just the natural byproduct of industrialization. If a place can no longer be useful, it's cut. However, some people can find other uses for these sinister feeling places. Oficina Chacabuco is just such a place. Making its money through nitrate mining at one point, this spot lost a lot of business when petroleum-based fertilizers became the next big thing. Without any other resources to rely upon, those who made their living here had to hightail it out. This left the remote town empty for a number of years. However, during General Pinochet's bloody rule in the 70s, this place was used for something else entirely. Political prisoners would be forcefully brought here and left to fend for themselves in the ghost town. They couldn't escape either, as the regime set up a wicked barrier of barbed wire and landmines. I'm sure more than one individual tried their best to escape, only to end up on the receiving end of some of these implements of death. So whether the town is haunted by the souls of those who lost their livelihood or by those who fought against a dictatorship, it's an extra ghastly ghost town indeed. Coming in at number 1, Pripyat, Ukraine. The ghost town to end all ghost towns. Absolutely full of eerie images, from old propaganda to abandoned, weather-worn dolls. There isn't a creepier experience than sifting through the legendary waste left behind after the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown. After this power plant melted down, introducing the surrounding area to more radiation than 100 times that produced by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, hundreds of thousands of people had to be evacuated, and fast. For more than 20 years, nobody was allowed back in. Legally anyways, because plenty of folks did go back in spite of warnings against returning. Who knows what the long-term impact of nuclear fallout will be on this area. Generations of wildlife, flora and fauna will be impacted, and the area will be uninhabitable for some time. However, these days the radiation levels are low enough that people can visit the town and take in the ominous vibes. See the abandoned schoolhouses, stroll through homes that were left largely as is since the day of the disaster, witness the destruction caused by the meltdown. The reason behind Pripyat's abandonment aren't that mysterious, but the circumstances surrounding the disaster, the follow-up, and how things are meant to operate now are.
In at number 5, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo, Colorado was a former gold mining camp in Chaffee Country. Today, it is one of the best preserved ghost towns in Colorado, as the entire district was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. The area was originally settled in 1878 and was made official in 1880, when gold and silver began to bring many people to the area. At one point, the population reached more than 2,000 people. In 1881, the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad came through the area and a station was built in St. Elmo. From here, the tracks continued to Romley, Hancock, and through the historic Alpine Tunnel. St. Elmo was considered the main source of supplies arriving by train for the area settlers, and eventually, several merchandise stores, 5 hotels, a telegraph office, a town hall, 5 restaurants, 2 sawmills, a schoolhouse, a weekly newspaper called The Mountaineer, and numerous saloons and dance halls filled the town. The miners worked at several mines throughout the area that were rich in silver, gold, copper, and iron. In 1890, a fire destroyed the business section and the town was never entirely rebuilt. This was about the same time that St. Elmo's peaked in population with about 2,000 residents. Afterward, many of the mines were depleted and many miners moved out of the area. More mines continued to fail in the ensuing years, and the closure of the Alpine Tunnel in 1910. The state of the structures paired with depleting mines led many in the community in search of new, more prosperous mining towns to call home. The railroad continued to run until 1922, and it has been said that the rest of St. Elmo's population rode the last train out of town, never to return. In 1969, the United States recognized St. Elmo as a historic district, and soon after, it became a unique tourist attraction that's open to the public, showcasing what life was like in the Old West. There is no shortage of urban legends and reports of hauntings in St. Elmo, but the most common occurrence of paranormal activity centers around the town's most notable family. To this day, one of the members of the Stark family still can be spotted in the ghost town. Anton's only daughter Annabelle resided there until she died in 1960. As legend has it, Annabelle continued her promise to protect the city even after she took her last breath. In at number 4 we have Rhyolite, Nevada. Founded in 1904 and abandoned by 1916, Rhyolite was one of several short-lived boom towns from the late gold rush era. People were drawn to the desert on the edge of Death Valley by the promise of gold found amongst quartz in local mines. And by 1906 the town had all the promising indicators of permanence and the largest population in the area. The town's citizens had an active social life, including baseball games, dances, basket socials, whist parties, tennis, a symphony, Sunday school picnics, basketball games, Saturday night variety shows at the Opera House, and pool tournaments. In 1906, Countess Majowski opened the Alaska Glacier Ice Cream Parlor to the delight of the local citizenry. That same year, an enterprising miner, Tom T. Kelly, built a bottle house out of 50,000 beer and liquor bottles. But in 1907, the US financial markets were rocked by panic that saw closures of banks, businesses, and mines. Rhyolite began to falter. The mine closed in 1911. Some claim that Rhyolite, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas, was once home to thousands of people, though not much remains of its glory days, which lasted less than 20 years. Set up in 1905, the town was a mining hotspot, but after the richest ore was exhausted, workers left for a new pasture and the population had dropped to close to zero by 1920. Industrialist Charles M. Schwab invested heavily in Rhyolite's infrastructure, which boasted a school, electric lights, water mains, newspapers, a hospital, and even an opera house, some of which can be seen today. There are only around 10 significant structures, yet the site is very evocative. The crumbling remains set against a backdrop of stark desert hills.
In third place, time to visit the Bodie State Historic Park. So formerly a genuine gold mining town, located east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in Mono County, California, and now a national landmark, it is known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the world. It is named after W.S. Bodie. First name unknown, but rumored to be either William or Waterman, who discovered gold in 1859 in an area now known as Brody Bluff. He tragically passed in a snowstorm that same winter, and was never present for what came to be. According to pioneer Judge McClinton, the district's name was changed from the proper spelling of B-O-D-E-Y to B-O-D-Y, and then a few other phonetic variations, to eventually B-O-D-I-E, after a painter in the nearby boomtown of Aurora lettered a sign as such. An accidental typo that stuck through history, which is a good reminder to proofread your work. I don't do it enough. While the output from the mine is largely insignificant in terms of mining history, the violence and early endings to lives tell a different story. And a particularly harsh winter between 1878 and 79 claimed hundreds of lives, with many others perishing from falling timbers and explosions underground. So Bodie as a town grew to have a reputation for violence and lawlessness. And unlike other mining camps at the time, killings were daily events. Robberies, stage holdups, and fights happened at such a frequency that no complete record could be kept. Reverend F.M. Warrington would describe the area in 1881 as a sea of sin, lashed by the tempests of lust and passion. The first of 4 mysterious fires tore through the business district in 1892, the next destroying the town mill in 1912, and another destroying the same mill again in 1898. The last of the unknown fires demolished most of what was left of the now ghost town in 1932, taking many lives way too soon in the process. So when the last producing mine shut down after 1945, very few people were left living in what was left of the town, and all eventually met untimely ends. One man shot his wife unprompted, and 3 other men from the town took it upon themselves to take his life for that act. So according to historians, the ghost of that man would visit the 3 men after his passing, shaking his fist and appearing as if he was cursing them out. Those men soon died of mysterious diseases and illnesses. Visitors to the area have reported meeting spirits that leave them feeling suffocated, seeing doors open and close on their own, and rocking chairs that may or may not have a menacing older lady staring them down, or even the empty chair rocking on its own. Though Bodie might be a bit of a tourist destination nowadays, but if you remove anything from the land, I'm talking like a pebble, you'll be cursed with remorse and tragedy. The park keeps a logbook of all letters and items returned to them, with each thief writing an apology note to Bodie for what was taken. The curse is upheld by the ghosts of residents past who guard against thieves and protect the town's treasures. Okay, so kleptos, steer clear or be cursed. In second place, we have the island of Poveglia. Yep, another entire abandoned island. This one's a little creepier though. So the island is located in the lagoon near Venice, and is famous for being one of the most haunted places in Italy. Tourists and locals alike are banned from the island, which was used for centuries as a place to exile the sick to prevent the spread of disease and contain the mentally ill in an asylum built in the late 1800s. Yes, I'll backtrack and elaborate. So in 1348, the bubonic plague arrived in Venice and Poveglia, like many other small islands at the time, and it became a quarantine colony. The plague on average killed 1 out of 3 Europeans, by the way. So fearing the unbridled spread of the disease, Venice exiled many of its symptom-bearing citizens there. So at the island center, the dead and those too sick to protest were burned on giant pyres. So this included the tens of thousands of Venice citizens just dying on the mainland. Those fires would burn once more in 1630 when the Black Death again swept through the city. The small island was used as a mass burial ground, and ashes from human remains make up as much as 50% of the island's soil. Cripes, I hope it's a good fertilizer. The deaths of nearly 160,000 people on the island have given it its nickname, the Island of Ghosts. A doctor at the asylum was known to have experimented on patients with crude lobotomies and jumped from the bell tower in the late 1930s after claiming he had been driven mad by ghosts. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. A report titled Haunted History states that some restoration work had started in recent history, but abruptly stopped without explanation. Okay, maybe this is one spot on today's list that I might not want to visit. And in first place, we have St. Elmo in Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town and allegedly the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, while also boasting the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. The town was a major gold and silver trading center and the hub of life for many pioneers, outlaws, and miners for decades. So it was originally called Forest City, but St. Elmo was settled in 1878 and became an official township in 1880 with the arrival of the first post office. So the residents of the town were forced to change the name because there were already too many forest cities in the area. So gotta applaud the originality. St. Elmo went through a massive gold rush, reaching the height of its population of 2,000 residents in only 10 days. The majority of the town worked in one of the 4 local mines. The Mary Murphy mine was the most profitable mine and the longest operating, having produced over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. When the mines began to close down, the town began to dwindle. The Mary Murphy mine continued to operate until 1922, but was shut down when the railroad was abandoned. Postal service was discontinued in 1952 after the death of St. Elmo's postmaster. Now for the fun part, ghost stories. I saved the best for last for a reason. The most famous ghost of St. Elmo is Annabelle Dirty Annie Stark, not to be confused with the beloved Annabelle doll. This Annabelle is the descendant of Anton and Anna Stark, who arrived in St. Elmo with the Pacific Railroad in 1881. Anton was a section boss in the mines, while Anna ran the Home Comfort Hotel located on Poplar Street and the general store. Oh, and both structures are still standing today. Anna Stark was known as a cruel and harsh woman who never allowed her 3 children, Roy, Tony, and Annabelle, out in the town to mingle or work alongside what she deemed the simple town folk. Annabelle grew up attractive and passionate for the town, and her love of St. Elmo was fierce. After the death of her mother, Annabelle and Tony inherited the hotel, and the once impeccably clean establishment fell to shambles. So along with the decline of the town, Annabelle began to lose her grasp on reality. The town soon called her Dirty Annie because she would emerge in filthy clothing and her hair was in a tangled mess all the time. Finally, free of the harsh rule of her mother, most people assumed this was her quiet rebellion. Residents remember strolling the main street with her firearm loaded and hung over one shoulder, ready to protect the town from anyone who dared to threaten it. Since her death, it is told she can still be found roaming the streets. Only a short while after Annabelle had passed away, the hotel was left to a family friend whose grandchildren were playing inside the hotel, when suddenly all of the doors slammed shut and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The children cried and screamed, and finally the room returned to the outside temperature, and the door slowly swung open. Oh, that's not the only ghost story. Don't worry. A woman skiing down Poplar Street at dusk was struck by a peculiar sight of a lovely looking woman in a long white gown glaring out of the second-story window of the Home Comfort Hotel. Now the skier was shocked. She knew the owner of the hotel was on vacation and nobody was supposed to be inside. As she turned to see what the woman was eyeing, she noticed snowmobiles approaching. So sidebar, snowmobiling is illegal in St. Elmo. So the skier went and advised the group, who promptly apologized and went back where they came from. When she turned back to look at the hotel, the woman in the window was still watching, and she lowered her head, nodded at the skier, turned and vanished before her eyes. So curious and in disbelief, the skier went back the next day to find every window and door were locked. When the owner of the hotel returned, the 2 women searched the property with nothing to be found. So was it Annabelle keeping watch? Be sure to let me know in the comments what you think.
Coming in at number 5, we have Grafton, Utah. Located just a few miles away from Zion National Park in Utah, the now abandoned town of Grafton can be found. The town was originally established in 1859 when 5 Mormon families nearby were led to establish a town they called Wheeler to plant cotton, which would have been a profitable commodity during the Civil War. After only 2 years, the town was struck by a massive flood starting on January 8th of 1862 that washed away the entire town. However, the pioneers did not give up that easily and moved about a mile upstream and founded a new town named Grafton. They grew cotton, alfalfa, and wheat, but life was harsh and many residents lost their life due to the diseases and various accidents. The mortality rate was also extremely high, which accounts for about 77 total graves in the nearby cemetery. The town flourished for a while despite recurring floods, with a church and adobe schoolhouse being built in 1886, but when the Hurricane Canal was built in 1906, many families started to move to Rockville and Hurricane, and by 1920 only 3 families remained in the town, and in 1944 the town's last residents, Frank Russell and his wife Ellen, moved as well. And although the town is now well maintained by the non-profit volunteer organisation of the Grafton Heritage Partnership Project, its dark past can still be felt when exploring the area. People have reported hearing ghostly footsteps over the creaky floors in the empty buildings, as well as the breath of ghostly souls on the back of their necks. The entire town gives visitors a feeling as if being watched, and the shadowy figures can sometimes be spotted in the windows. Another visitor of the ghost town visited the basement of the Russell home and claimed that they found a chair sitting in the middle of the basement with a mark on it as if someone had recently sat on it. They had been exploring for over an hour at this point and had not encountered another person on the way to town or the entire time they were there, but for some reason the print looked brand new, with not a single speck of dust on it. After filming for a few moments in the basement and recording into the silence, they felt a rush of air, as if someone had just walked past them, which scared them, and they decided it was time to leave. There are even rumours of skinwalkers lurking in the area. Even the cemetery itself has many reports of people hearing crying, laughing and chilling screams, especially late in the day and when it's overcast. Some people have even seen a woman in a dress with her hair in a bun walking around the cemetery sobbing, but when they approached her she disappeared into thin air. There is no doubt that there is definitely a very uncomfortable feeling while walking around the gravestones, which isn't surprising knowing the sad history of the people laid to rest there. In at number 4 we have Deadwood, South Dakota. The town of Deadwood is located in South Dakota and gained attraction in the gold rush of 1876. In 1875, a miner named John B. Pearson found gold in a narrow canyon in these northern Black Hills. This canyon became known as Deadwood Gulch because of many dead trees that lined the canyon walls at the time. Practically overnight, the tiny gold camp boomed into a town that played by its own rules that attracted outlaws, gamblers and gunslingers along with gold seekers. At its height, the city had a population of 5,000, attracting larger-than-life Old West figures back then. The business district comprised largely of saloons, dance halls, card parlors, and bodacious bordellos. They were all hungry for gold and did whatever they had to in order to get some. The business did whatever they could to serve the gold diggers, and sometimes that led to a little bit of conflict. Because of this, the now ghost town still lives with stories of its dead residents haunting present-day hotels and saloons. In 1876, Deadwood survived a smallpox epidemic that nearly wiped out the whole town. There were so many infected that multiple tents were erected to quarantine the stricken. In addition, it suffered 3 major fires. One devastating fire occurred on September 26, 1879, destroying more than 300 buildings and consuming the belongings of many inhabitants. Many numerous economic hardships also followed, pushing it to the verge of becoming another Old West ghost town. One of the most paranormally active sites in the ghost town is the Adam House. Built in 1892 after owner W.E. Adams had a stroke on the premises, his wife was so disturbed by the sounds of his ghost still walking around, rocking the rocking chairs and so forth, that she moved and left the house untouched, exactly as it was when he died. Now visitors and employees report having seen a rocking chair rock on its own, encountered a shadowy man standing at an upstairs window, and heard voices and footsteps in rooms throughout the house. In at number 3 we have Kennecott, Alaska. A once flourishing town with businesses, shops, a train and a lively community is now left as a ghost town. The town of Kennecott in Alaska was flooded with people after copper was discovered in 1900. After the discovery, a group of wealthy investors formed the Kennecott Copper Corporation to mine the mountains above the Kennecott and Root glaciers. In the 27 years the mine was in full operation, the company and town grew significantly in fortune and people, and at its peak Kennecott employed 600 people. But by 1938 the copper was mostly gone, the mine was shut down and the town was left abandoned. The town was abruptly abandoned by its citizens, leaving most of their possessions behind. Since the middle of the 1950s the place had been completely deserted, with the railroad discontinued service that same year. Reports of ghosts along the abandoned tracks of the Kennecott train have been claimed for decades, while other visitors report having seen old tombstones along the route of the tracks, though the gravestones then vanish by the time the visitors make their return trip. Others have reported hearing disembodied voices and phantom children laughing. Reportedly, a 1990s construction project were halted after workers were scared away by the creepy sounds and unexplainable events. In at number 2 we have Exuna Tunich, Belize. I hope that's how you say it. Deep in the jungle of Belize lies an ancient ruins of an abandoned town that has been left to crumble. The town has been left abandoned for over 1,000 years, though before the abandonment of this large and populated town, Exuna Tunich was a thriving metropolis. The first construction at the site dates back to sometime in 200 AD, with the growth of the town continuing until its final days of functioning as a city. The town grew to consist of many temples and palaces, including its largest and most recognizable, known as El Castillo. Exuna Tunich has lied abandoned since around 1000 AD. It is thought that due to consistent devastating events such as an earthquake and other natural disasters, caused a sudden evacuation of the large Mayan city around 700 AD. The disaster caused extensive damage to the main pyramid of Exuna Tunich. Although the city was reoccupied sometime after, it only remained active for another 300 years before it was left completely unoccupied. After abandonment, the site remained empty, eventually being encapsulated by the surrounding jungle and nature, until it was rediscovered by explorers in the early 1890s. The name Exuna Tunich comes from the ghost stories that have haunted the ghost town for years. The ghost story of Exuna Tunich is rumored to start in 1893, after the first sighting of the ghost happened. The first ghost sighting goes as one morning a man who was part of a research team working on the site saw what he described as a Mayan maiden ascending the staircase of the Exuna Tunich's main pyramid. This vision caught him by surprise, so he continued to watch as the woman walked further up the stairs. Suddenly she stopped and turned to look at the man, where he was able to get a glimpse of her glowing red eyes that pierced his soul. She then turned to continue her climb to the top of the pyramid, where she would disappear amongst its stone columns. The shocked man quickly assembled a team to search for this woman, yet no trace of her was ever found. Since this sighting, countless more visitors have reported to also spot the ghostly maiden who haunts Exuna Tunich. She is always described to be ascending El Castillo's stairs. To this day, the sightings and reports from visitors continue. The ghost frequency is what gives Exuna Tunich its name, which translates to the Stone Lady in the Mayan language. Some believe that this Mayan maiden have formerly lived within the city many years ago. Others believe that she was a human sacrifice, trapped to relive her last moments of ascending to the top of the pyramid where her ritual would have been conducted. Then there are a few who believe her to be some sort of ancient godly spirit linked to the site and the Mayan culture. And finally, in at number 1 we have Calico, California. The ghost town of Calico can be found in California, midway between Barstow and Yermo. The beginning of the town started in 1875 and was built under the impression that there were prospects for silver in the Calico Mountains. But in the spring of 1883, many of the local miners left Calico when borax was discovered 3 miles east at Borate. Though Calico again boomed in 1884 as additional silver discoveries were made. Gaining a population of some 2,500, the town supported 24 saloons and gambling dives that never closed, as well as more establishments such as the church, public school, dance school, and a literary society, along with dozens of retail businesses. By the late 1800s, Calico was bustling with prospectors searching for their fortunes, and the Calico mining district became one of the richest in the state. Calico's final decline began when the price of silver fell in the 1890s, but the break production kept it alive, even through the panic of 1906. They tried to hold on, and borax for a time substituted for the shiny metal that had been Calico's fortune. Calico kept churning out valuable minerals until it finally exhausted its supply in the 1920s. Calico was soon abandoned and left to gradually decay in the desert sun until little remained, but in 1951 it was purchased by the Walter Knott, an ex-miner, and rebuilt as a modern ghost town. He restored the town to mostly how it was, in certain cases rebuilding some of the old structures as they were back in the 1880s. Considered one of the top haunted locations in California, Calico has its fair share of ghost stories, when one of the most active and known ghosts of the abandoned town is Lucy Lane. Lucy is often seen in a black lace dress walking back and forth between her home and store. Others have allegedly seen phantom school teachers and other residents who have been known to grab visitors' legs or pinch their ankles. Some visitors have also reported seeing a floating red light inside the buildings, while other visitors have reported extreme cold spots throughout the mine and an eerie feeling in various places of the town.